Welcome back, everyone. It's Jonathan Hung back with his Ask an Angel series, and this is my new video podcast. And I'm happy to introduce Alex Simon, the CEO and founder of a company that I've invested called Elude. Thanks, Alex, for doing this.
Great to be on and great to chat. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, great. I'm so excited to let everyone know what you've done with Elude, what it is, and the journey for yourself as an entrepreneur. So, when were you founded? When did you come up with the idea of Elude?
So Elude actually started at this point probably 5 years back with a personal idea. It was more about personal struggle when trying to book travel. We really didn't do anything until kind of like the last 2 years is where a lot of the last momentum has been built. But yeah, the premise and the idea behind Elude is kind of looking at travel options based solely on budget instead of looking at it by destination.
Right.
So from a user's point of view, they come onto our platform, they say they got, let's say, $1,000 as their budget. Let's say they're leaving from Los Angeles. We showcase flight and hotel combinations that match that user's budget. So kind of flipping the script on the way that people search trips.
Great. Wonderful. And what do you think the burning question you're solving that's different than like what Airbnb does or, Expedia, Travelocity, everything like that?
Yeah, so I think when comparing, let's say, like a larger travel site,
Hmm.
what we find is a lot of them are focused solely on the booking, kind of just a transaction, and really just caring about the actual booking. Whereas in our case, we're really more about the user point of view and learning more about that user. So whether that's through our onboarding, which we ask kind of a fun, quirky, questions to get to know them, and then down to even the personalization when we're talking about the trips. The example that I always like to give is, if you hate long flights and you hate beaches, showcasing a Thailand as an option is probably not going to convert well.
Right.
And so really trying to learn more about the user and be hyper focused about personalization in the way that travel agencies really haven't been able
Mm.
to do from a digital point.
Got it. Wonderful. So, you know, right now, obviously 2020 was a challenging year. I actually remember when I approved the wire for Elude, I was actually on a cruise ship on
Yes,
in
that's right.
February 2020. I was like, and I met you right before I had to go leave, and I was just thought like, wow. And then, everything happened. So I'd love to hear, how the journey's been for you. At that time, I know you're launching soon with the app, and yeah, I'd love to hear what happened, what's going on, and how. I don't want to say surviving, but like you pivoted, right? And you had to do what you had to do as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I think actually was a really good thing in our particular case because it really gave a lot of
Hmm.
focus on the brand and kind of really focus on the technological piece of getting it to a point where we can go live.
Hmm.
I know for a lot of other travel startups, it was pretty detrimental, right? They either needed to close shop or
Yep.
kind of pack up and kind of reassess. In our case, we were very fortunate that we had really great, not only just investors and advisors, but we were able to really kind of steer clear of launching in a midst of chaos.
Yeah.
Whereas I think right now is probably the best time, and we continuously say this is that people are already starting to travel. The last few weeks,
Hmm.
we've been hitting record highs of domestic, and I'm sure as rules and restrictions start to open up, that we'll start to see that internationally. But we're in a really kind of interesting point where people are itching to get away. There's a little bit more remote work than there ever has been, and so people are inclined to go for a week in Hawaii rather than what traditionally they would only take 3 or 4 days for. And so I think we're definitely well positioned for entering into the market during this time. But
Hmm.
completely agree. I think COVID really kind of threw a wrench in the way that people and travel companies really exist.
And what I appreciate about you and your team is really just your team, really, right? Because sometimes when you start and you're investing in a company, you're not going to have all the tech built out. You're not going to
Yep.
have like sometimes for a consumer good, yeah, you probably better have the drink ready or the snack ready or whatever the product ready. But for something for Elude, for example, how are you able to get people to believe in you and the rest of your team members? And I'd love to tell for you to tell how did you build the team and why your leadership team is so unique.
Yeah, so we have it not only from the investor point of view that have dealt with travel in the past, which is again kind of a clear indication that they are betting on the right sector. We have industry leaders from companies like Priceline, Snapchat,
Mhm.
Instagram, and handful of other, very key execs that joined our board, not only as investors, but also as advisors. And what I like to say is myself and Frankie, who again is my co-founder, we're first-time founders.
Hmm.
We're going at this from a point of view of kind of first principles, and what we really like is having the industry experts that have already paved the way for, even if it is legacy type models, they've been through the road and they understand kind of the jargon, especially in the travel
Right.
space that becomes very old and antiquated.
Hmm.
And so in our particular case, how do we get them? It was more so courting them and actually kind of positioning ourselves as kind of the new way to book trips. And for instance, with Jeff Hoffman, who's over from Priceline, being able to actually give him updates month in and month out about the different progress. It wasn't, one of those things where it was just a, hey, can you join our team? We would love to have you. It was really kind of building the relationship so that as we navigate kind of the waters in the future, we have these industry experts that we can really lean on. And what we pride ourselves on from kind of our team point of view is not just looking at it from a capital point of view of can this person provide investment into
Right.
what we're building, really looking at kind of building a relationship for a long-term, a long-term problem here. So we're excited to have kind of those industry experts and, happy to go into also our team when it comes to the, the
Hmm.
developers and PR agents and marketing guys as well.
Yeah, let's talk about that. How to build a team, right? Because you're doing, of course, you're a consumer facing product, but obviously there's so much front end, back end developers that you need to get. How are you able to recruit these people? How did you find somebody? Because I don't know, I know, but I love for the audience to know, like, you don't necessarily have a technical background yourself, and that's not
Correct. Yeah.
necessarily Frankie, but like, how did you guys are leaders, you're visionaries, but how did you find the right people to help you?
Yeah, so I think something early in my career and prior to starting Elude, I was over in investment banking, and something that I learned very quickly was you could always hire for roles that are pretty specific,
Hmm.
but what you really need to start looking at from a macro point of view is
Yeah.
building the right team, and if everybody's on the same mission. And so what I think we've done a very good job with is building the right team that comes with either prior experience or the hungriness to kind of change the way that things are done. And so we brought in our CTO, who is going to be, our other co-founder as well, as we kind of scale out that team that becomes pivotal.
Right.
But then also looking at kind of other areas of focus like customer experience, right? So
Hmm.
when booking a trip, you need to have somebody to call if something goes wrong or in those cases. And so really kind of focusing on the areas that are most important for our customers has definitely been kind of top of mind. And with that, I think marketing is clearly a big indicator here is, our main goal is to come out with a brand that is different and unique, that's kind of brand led in the travel space. And that's not done, typically it's just kind of like a booking engine and it
Right.
doesn't really matter what the brand is. You're just kind of going and completing the transaction. But in our main focus, it's been how do we get the design and the look and the feel of the app to be, what customers really want it to be. And that's through a lot of testing and a lot of kind of iterations. But Frankie's our guy when it comes to
Right.
everything marketing.
Yeah. No, wonderful. And speaking of that, I mean, my next question would be like, what do you think you're doing different from your competitors? What are they missing? Because, it's the idea like, oh, when you talk to investors, and we'll go into the investor questions next, but like, what would you say is the uniqueness of Elude?
Yeah, I'd say there's two big pieces. One is the time component,
Hmm.
and then the second is the way that the product is actually kind of driving. So I'll start with the second. Basically, the way that we're starting right now with budget first for flight and hotel doesn't exist. Right now, you can go on to, let's say, Kayak, or you can go on to Skyscanner, and you can do some level of a search, but it's only
Right.
for
Right.
flights. You can't do kind of a full packaged bundle trip. And I think what we're realizing very quickly with our users is that they want something that is unique, but they also want something that's budget conscious, right? They only have $1,000 or $1,500 to spend, and they want the best place to get to. So that's much more on the product focus. From the time, somebody, can do these searches, but it's going to take them hours upon end to kind of back into different cities. Whereas in our particular case, literally within seconds, based off of your budget alone, we're able to tell you where you could afford to get to. And again, that psychology of dopamine hit
Right.
doesn't exist right now in the travel space.
So next up, let's talk about our favorite topic, right? Like investors,
Yeah.
and how do you find them? Like, obviously funding is always a concern. Like, how have you found your investors? And in terms of investors, what kind of investors, in this early stage, do you like to work with more? Angel investors or, sorry, Alexa, let's start over. It's really about finding your right investors. Like, what is the best way of finding an angel investor first or an institutional? What have you found that's working for you?
Yeah, I think for pre-seed, I know in our particular case, it was much more a combination of angel and institutions. I think what we looked for when it comes to our investors specifically was, did they understand the space, and do they see the larger vision for what we're building? Typically in travel, you find it, somebody either has been burned in travel before and they don't like kind of touching the
Mhm.
space, or in other
Yeah.
cases, they really enjoy the space, and again, they have pride or background into that sector. So that's very helpful. And I think specifically, I was kind of referencing this earlier, but when we went out for fundraise, we never really looked for investors for the sake
Mm.
of building capital and only capital. I think a lot of startups early on get kind of this starry eye of, oh wow, an investor is going to invest money into my business, and just look at it from the capital point of view.
Right.
Whereas I think really, again, from the early days when we were starting to build out Elude, is that we looked at every investor as kind of a long-term team member, and somebody that we
Mhm.
wanted to call, if it was going to be at Thursday night or Friday or early morning, if
Right.
something went wrong, we wanted to have those type of people in our arsenal. And
Mhm.
so we definitely, looked for kind of relative friends, if you will, as
Mhm. Mhm.
investors. But I think that really helped us kind of build as we grow as well. Because, in the early days, the first, let's say, $50,000 check, that's big for getting kind of the idea to fruition. But when you're scaling the company into building it, from a tech angle or marketing, you really need to have partners that dream as big as you do, basically.
No, it's great. And I want to point out something great for everyone in the audience and for future, entrepreneurs. Like, I think what Alex, you do great is like you always keep your investors informed. I mean, you always have like a newsletter, and I'd love for you to explain like what made you come up with that idea or that method, or like how often do you want to send it out? Because you make acknowledgments, what's going good, what's going bad, and what you need help with, and that's really the key. I think asking for help and letting us know, and not just like, oh, springing upon everybody at last seconds.
What I think we realized very quickly is, in the early days, again, when we were kind of pre-seed going into seed stage, when
Hmm.
we had only angel investors, it was fine to have calls here and there and keep updates based off of just, our investors at that point. But when you start to get into institutions and especially funds, you're really kind of building a different, product, right? You're building kind of a larger scale organization, and you can't, as a CEO, you can't allocate 15 hours a month just having calls with investors. And so the main reason actually that we kicked
Hmm.
off our newsletter was that it was really just a time optimal savings for us of saying, hey,
Hmm.
look, let's get everybody on the same page, and come up with clear highlights, lowlights, main questions or concerns and asks, and let everybody know kind of what's been happening over the course of the last month. Now,
Right.
mind you, that doesn't mean that we don't have the calls as catch-ups. We typically do, but it just alleviates a little bit of that stress because we're able to actually ask specific questions. And just as a few call outs, we were able to hire great candidates through some of our asks through our network. And it's not something that we just send out and get no responses. Typically, our investors respond back and help with kind of the required asks. So it's been a great thing for us.
I'd love to talk about your journey next. What would you tell, someone who's trying to get into the travel space now? Would you advise against it, or, like, what do you think you would have done differently? I mean, or the lessons you've learned along the way so far in your journey?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to specifically in the travel space,
Hmm.
I will say, as antiquated as someone thinks it is, it's probably 2 or 3 times that. And so,
Mm.
just for context, it took us close to 18 months to land our first partner, which is Sabre, which again
Oh yeah.
provides most of our flight and hotel. And so if you're looking at it as kind of like a quick fix, that's definitely not the route when you're building kind of a travel startup. And I know, when we were building in the early days, we were naive and we were thinking that it was going to take a little bit
Mhm.
sooner than it might have. But I think, my advice to entrepreneurs and specifically travel startups is I think that we're about to enter into kind of this new wave of travel. We're already starting to see it. And so we're very bullish on the idea that people are going to want to go to more places. And we're excited to bring them there.
There's this new path right now of like no code, low code, like test flight, and I know you've asked us to look at what you're working on.
Yep.
How do you feel? Like, because it seems like every day we're changing on the fly. And how do you able to implement everything? Because especially now, like with your new launch of the app, I'm sure you're
Yep.
going to get so many things, you did with quality assurance and all that. Like, how have you, as a founder and CEO, navigated that?
Yeah, it's the best example that I can give is real, and I know that this is so cliche, but it's like,
Mhm.
when you're raising a toddler and you're kind of going through different through different aspects. First it's maybe getting them to eat and then talk and then walk and those type of actions. Specifically as a startup, you feel those different inflection points as well. And so, in the early days when you're maybe no code or a little bit code, it's
Mhm.
fine to just kind of iterate and build a product that makes a little bit more sense and get people to test that process. But when you start to get into kind of, let's say, test flight or actually
Right.
getting people to download the app and experiment, you really need to get into the psychology about the user. And then, again, as we're preparing for our launch next week, it
Mhm.
gets even more exciting because you're dealing with real money, right?
Mhm.
You're dealing with actually somebody booking a flight and creating a ticket. Whereas in the early days, again, it was more so, can people go through this process and does this make sense? And so you're kind of learning as you're growing. And I think, specifically in our case, we're in the point now where, we've been able to walk for
Mhm.
a while. Now we're about to try to see if we could run. And I think that's what's most exciting.
Yeah, excellent. My next question is then about marketing. Like, what do you think? Because I always tell like my entrepreneurs, marketing, there's no right or wrong answer. Like, you have to test. You're just
Yep.
testing all the time. You hopefully set a budget aside and see what works. But even what works, it's not going to work a week from now. It's just you just try to get as many eyeballs as you can, get monthly recurring users as best you can, getting just eyeballs on the platform. I'd love to hear like what strategies you've employed or you're thinking about employing, and like, or agencies you want to work with or are working with.
Yeah, so I think very high level, marketing is definitely a category that I feel like makes or breaks companies.
Hmm.
I think the one thing, and this may be coming from my investment banking days too, but having data to actually understand what's happening rather than just putting money out there and hoping for the best. And so, making certain that there's different KPIs that you're trying to hit, or again, understanding basically where that money is being allocated to find more eyeballs. I completely agree is kind of top of mind. As far as kind of how we've went about it, I think our main users mostly are on social. So,
Hmm.
Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, those type of platforms. We've been very heavy on social media influencers, specifically whether they're travel or creative or lifestyle type, influencers. That's really started to pay a really great benefit for us. Just because, again, it's mass scale, and you can get to a lot of eyeballs in a very quick format.
Hmm.
And then the last piece that we just started to kind of dabble into, which is PR and marketing. Specifically on the PR side, it's really interesting because some of these large news agencies and media outlets, they really can help and kind of establish your business as something more legitimate. And so I would strongly urge a lot of businesses to look at those areas as well, especially as they're growing their startup.
Let's see, and let's talk about really like what is you think is your biggest learning to date, and what would you have done differently, in these last 18 months since we actually invested, right? I mean, it's over a
Yeah,
year and a half now, and I'm
yeah,
excited for you. Yeah.
I'd say the best. Let me see. The best advice that I can give is much more on the setting your own expectations and
Hmm.
then delivering. I think as a startup, there's so many different whether it's investors or marketers or team
Right.
members, everybody's giving their input as to kind of what the product should or could or won't be. And I think, from a CEO and specifically from a leadership point of view, you really need to be honing in on exactly what the main, let's call it version 1, version 2, and beyond are, and really just go out and execute. Because I think execution speaks for itself. Whereas, again, if you continue to have conversations and ask for advice, you're going to be getting a lot of input from a lot of resources. And then
Mhm.
that leads me to my second biggest aspect is know who you're taking advice from.
Mm.
And this is what I was getting at earlier of, we have industry experts, whether it's from the travel space
Mhm.
or social, and those are the people that we're going back to in terms of getting their feedback and advice. Whereas if somebody hasn't experienced that, it's probably best that you don't take their advice, or they're just
Right.
coming from it from one angle. And so
Mm.
learn how you're taking that advice and kind of and navigate accordingly.
Are there any, yeah, as an entrepreneur, are there any books or publications or podcasts or things that you like to learn or read from and like
Yes.
get motivated from? Because you always have to be constantly learning. There's no way one way to doing things.
So there's a book actually here. I
Nice.
have the Great CEO Within,
Uh-huh.
and it's by Matt McCary. And this is actually very helpful from an early stage CEO or anybody
Mhm.
that's looking into kind of leadership. It really kind of breaks down different wants and needs that you're going to need
Mm.
to kind of go through while you're building your company. And so I would strongly urge with that. And then also too, I always there's something that one of our advisors says, which is go and do kind of brain sponging. So go
Mm.
learn about different aspects that aren't relevant to your current startup. Because what it actually ends up doing is you can start to learn more about different
Right.
areas and see if there's bridges that can connect. And it's always just interesting to learn about new and innovative ways to kind of think.
Okay, wonderful. And this is Asking the Angel. So, Alex, love any questions you have for me, or like, what want to catch up on anything, please. Love to
Yeah,
help you out along the journey.
I think would love from your angle, like what do you say is the most prideful of being an angel investor or an investor in general? Seeing different startups, I'm sure every scenario is going to be different, but would love to get what you're most prideful of being an angel of.
Like we talked about, like, not all money is good money. I had a professor teach me that. And at the same time, like when you invest in someone, whether it's, a small check or a huge check, I want to be that relationship where like I'm your emergency contact.
Yeah,
If I ever have a book out, my autobiography, I'm going to let everyone know now it's going to be called In Case of Emergency, right? Because like
call John.
right? Yeah,
Yeah,
that's who you need to be, because it's not always going to be like, oh, great news. It's like, oh yeah, we're raising a huge valuation now, or hey, I need help with this. Even really a personal level. I mean, that's how you really truly develop a great friendship and relationship as an
yeah,
investor. As an angel investor, I think it's so great, because I always tell people like, hey, I'm trying to get you through high school.
yeah,
After Series A, like Alex, I hope I'll get a call, just like mom and dad, right? But like, hey, you're off to the races, and like you're gonna go through the world with me there to help as much as I can. But it's gonna be a whole new world. And for me to get you there is my goal. Because a lot of things can happen. I've had companies, who are raised at a unicorn valuation, and unfortunately, hey, they had to shut down. They had to bankrupt
yeah,
because market conditions or money wasn't spent the right way, or didn't, key hires weren't made. It happens. That's totally okay. But what gives me pride is like, hey, we went through the journey together. And listen, you're young. There's still other great opportunities. I don't think Elude's going to be your only company. You're probably going to do something else. And that's what excites me, because like you work with somebody, you trust them, because trust is so much easy. You might love somebody really easy, but trust, it just takes time to develop. And it's how you work day to day.
yeah. I love that, and I think too, going back to your point about the newsletters, that's kind of how we build
Mhm.
trust, as well as showing that we're actually executing.
Yeah.
One other question that I
Yeah.
definitely wanted to ask is, I guess, what got you into venture, as far as excitement wise? Like, how did you kind of get yourself into venture? I know we've shared
Yeah.
similar stories of kind of backgrounds, but would love to hear it from you.
No, it's funny. It's like people think there's like, it's not like becoming a lawyer or a doctor where it's like a step-by-step ladder where you're going, and like that makes sense. Like my journey was, I had a father who was an entrepreneur, and you're in the best country in the world to be an entrepreneur, no questions, because my father came here with $500 to his name. His parents unfortunately passed away. His father at 16, his mother at 3. And,
Wow.
he met my mother in Taiwan and they came here. And for him, it was just, for him to build the company that he built of contract manufacturing and clothing with just nothing to his name is just an amazing story because he found the right people. Like,
Yeah.
I always get a kick when people say like, oh, Steve Jobs did this or Elon Musk did that. Well, it's like, yeah, but there's a lot of people involved along the
It's
process.
the team. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the team. And for me, like that was so much important to me. I always people make fun of me sometimes, like, wow, you have like 4 degrees. You must love school. I'm like, well, if you want to be an actor, you have to practice. You have to do your
Yep.
lines. You have to go to school. Like my belief was that like as an entrepreneur, I had to find the best network of people to help me. I didn't care about the subject matter or getting good grades. It was like, oh, I know these great people. Like that's how I met my partner, Dave, going
Yeah.
to Wharton. And that was great. And I see things, he thinks totally differently than me, which is okay because I don't want to just like invest with somebody who thinks exactly like me. Like you
Yeah.
see the world differently and you have to get challenged no matter what, which is important. And so as an entrepreneur, I remember, I came back from working in China and I was just interested in something about Silicon Beach. I wish I knew better. The funniest thing is today, I mean, I don't know when this podcast will go out, but like today's the day that Robinhood is trading.
Yeah.
And I turned down Robinhood back in
Wow.
2012, just starting out. And you know what? I don't know if I would have turned it down now because
Yeah.
back then, like I was just starting. I didn't know much as an angel investor, but I knew I was wanting to learn more and more every day. So since 2012 until now, every day I learn more. I'm getting better and better as I grow because listen, we're all going to make mistakes. You're all going to have to pivot. There's no way you're going to do the same thing you were doing 2 years ago, much less a week from now when you're a startup.
Yeah.
So that's what's exciting to me. It's like
I love it.
it's like it's not the journey, it's the journey, it's not the finish line.
Yep. I completely agree. And it's kind of like an evolution, which is really nice, especially from where someone is to where
Yeah.
they're going, which is nice.
Yeah. And it's good. Like, hey, if one day it's like I get to see you and the NASDAQ where I'm next to you there, hey, that's great. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
But it's like the things you talk about where it's just like, wow, the struggle. Because like it wasn't just 0 to 1. Like, it sometimes is, but it's like it's not that easy as Peter Thiel says, or it's like it happens right away. It just it's really a process.
This is a funny thing. You'll get a kick out of this, but
Yeah.
just as far as like a funny story. So more recently, we just found out that we built the entire app without having an infant in mind, meaning that you couldn't purchase a ticket, or airfare,
Right.
or a hotel. And so we needed to rework the app basically to instill and make sure that an infant is included if there's somebody that wants to include an infant. But it's things like that again, like if you were to tell me 6 months ago when we were building this, like that was that's going to be something that we need to be mindful of. It's just like a running list of constant fire drills basically to get things going. So it's it's just funny how things start to evolve.
No, absolutely. And really, it's just keeping the dialogue going. That's why I appreciate you and Frankie just telling us what's going on. Like it's amazing. Like I give you guys credit all in the world because even after us, you kept raising money, and that was the key. And it's like, well, listen, anyone calls me, I'll give a ringing endorsement because listen, they said what they were doing. They weren't like all of a sudden it's not a travel company. No. Even with like what happened in 2020, we're still on the ball. But this is how we're going to change, how we're going to do things differently to try to get there. I mean, that's really important. I mean, I hate the fact sometimes we're like, even I have a CEO, I'm not going to name names, but it's just like, I invested really early and he did everything he said he was, but like, I have no idea what happens, how he got there.
Yeah.
It was just like, to him, I was just a check, and that's totally fine. I think that's totally fine as well, but maybe I could have helped out better here and there. I mean, I really think, because when you're getting married, like when we got married, like back in 2020, it's really a true partnership. You have
really
to be
is.
able to count on each other for good or bad.
Yeah, I love it. I definitely, and I appreciate you bringing me on here. Definitely, I watch all of your things on LinkedIn, so really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Alex. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's for the next person because you gotta pay it forward. Like everyone thinks it's like, wow, no, they're just on the IPOing now. It's not easy. I'm like, oh man, listen, there's
like a full process.
We thought it was over. That's
That's
great.
great.
Well, thank you so much, Alex, for the time. I look
Of
forward to
course.
seeing you succeed for more and more, and hopefully, you'll still take my calls down the
Yeah,
road.
no, we're thrilled to have you on the journey.